believe that the current administration's plan to repeal and replace ACA will ultimately benefit the economy and Berkshire or not?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer. I'll give you two answers here. The first one being that if you go back to 1960 or thereabouts, corporate taxes were about 4% of GDP. I mean, they bounced around some. And now they're about 2% of GDP. And at that time, healthcare was 5% of GDP, and now it's about 17% of GDP. So when American business talks about taxes strangling our competitiveness or that sort of thing, they're talking about something that as a percentage of GDP has gone down from 4 to 2, while medical costs, which are borne to a great extent by business, have gone from 5 to 17%. So medical costs are the tapeworm of American economic competitiveness. I mean, if you're really talking about it, and business knows that. They don't feel they can do much about it, but it is not. The tax system is not crippling Berkshire's competitiveness around the world or anything of the sort. Our health costs have gone up incredibly and will go up a lot more. And if you look at the rest of the world, there were a half a dozen countries that were around our 5% if you go back to the earlier years. And while we're at 17 now, they're at 10 or 11. So they have gained a 5 or 6 point advantage, the world, and even in these countries with fairly high medical costs.
And that's with socialized medicine.
Yeah. So it's a huge, whatever I said then goes and is accentuated now. And that isn't a problem. I mean, that is a problem the society is having trouble with and is going to have more trouble with. And regardless of which party's in power or anything of the sort, it almost transcends that. In terms of the new act that was passed a couple days ago versus the Obama administration act, it's a very interesting thing. All I can tell you is the net effect of that act on one person is that my federal income taxes would have gone down 17% last year if what was proposed went into effect. So it is a huge tax cut for guys like me, and you'll have to figure out the effects of the rest of the act. But the one thing I can tell you is if it goes through the way the House put in, I mean, anybody with $250,000 a year of adjusted gross income and a lot of investment income is going to have a huge tax cut. And when there's a tax cut, either the deficit goes up or they get the taxes from somebody else. So as it stands now, that is the one predictable effect if it should pass. The Senate will do something different and go to a conference and who knows what happens. But that is in the law that was passed a couple days ago. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with you about the medical care. What I don't like about the medical care is that a lot of it, we're getting too much medicine. There's too much chemotherapy on people that are all but dead. And all kinds of crazy things go on in Medicare and in other parts of the health system. And there's so many vested interests that it's very hard to change. But I don't think any rational person looking objectively from the outside at the American system of medical care. We all love the new life-saving stuff and the new chemotherapies and the new drugs and all that. But my God, this system is crazy. And the cost is just going wild. And it does put our manufacturers at a big disadvantage with other people where the government is paying the medical costs. And so I agree with Warren totally.
If you had to bet 10 years from now, we'll be at higher or lower than 17% of GDP.
Well, if present trends continue, it'll get more and more. There are huge vested interests in having this thing continue the way it is. and they're very vocal and active, and the rest of us are indifferent. So naturally, we get a terrible result. And I would say that on this issue, both parties hate each other so much that neither one of them can think rationally. And I don't think that helps either.
It's, it is kind of interesting that, with the federal government spends, or raises, we'll say $3.5 trillion or something like that. And I mean, the degree of concern everybody has about that, although that's stayed fairly steady in the 18% or so of GDP, plus or minus a couple points. But $3 trillion plus is spent on health care, and everybody wants the best, and it's perfectly understandable. But it's a it's a big number compared to the whole federal budget. I mean, there's some overlap and all of that, but it's, if you talk about world competitiveness of American industry, it's the biggest single variable where we keep getting more and more out of whack with the rest of the world. And it's very tough for political parties to attack it. Basically it's a political subject.
But a lot of it is deeply immoral. If you have a group of hospital people and doctors that are sort of feasting like a bunch of jackals on the carcass of some dying person, it's not a pretty sight.
Tell them about that group out in California that.
Oh yes.
Perfect success.
This is Reading. This is one of my favorite stories. There are a bunch of very ambitious cardiologists and heart surgeons in Reading, and they got the thought that really what a heart was a widowmaker. So every patient that came in, they said, "You've got a widowmaker in your chest, and we know how to fix it." And so they recommended heart surgery for everybody. And of course, they developed a huge volume of heart surgery, and they got very wonderful results because nobody comes through heart surgery better than the man who doesn't need it at all. And they made so much money that the hospital chain, which was Tenet, brought all its other hospitals. Why can't you be more like Reading? And this is a true story. And it went on and on and on. And finally, there was some beloved Catholic priest, and they said, "You've got a widowmaker in your chest." And he didn't believe them, and he blew the whistle.
He was a priest. You can see why he didn't believe him.
And at any rate, yes. Well, when you get a routine, you just keep using it, The heart is a widowmaker, it's a widowmaker. Later, I met one of the doctors who threw these people out of the medical profession, and I said to him, in the end, did they think they were doing anything wrong? He said, "No, Charlie. They thought that what they were doing was good for people." That is why it's so hard to fix these things. The delusion that comes into people as they make money and get more successful by doing god-awful things should never be underestimated. And there's a lot of that goes on, and it went on to such gross craziness. And you thought little Wells Fargo looks like innocence, had a little trouble with this incentive system, but when the heart surgery rate was 20 times normal or something, you'd think you'd notice if you're running a hospital. But they did notice. They wanted the other hospitals to be more like it.
They had a terrific success ratio.